This is an SM Media production.
Hi folks, and welcome to episode 4 of this series of The Rewind right here on SM Media. I'm Corbett. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host as always. We are going to talk about what happened in 2004 when Vladimir Romanov, a Lithuanian banker, took control at Hearts during a bad financial time for the club. To join me on this episode to look back at this weird time for Hearts supporters is Liam Corbett from This Is My Story pod. Liam, it's a pleasure to welcome you on. Thank you for joining me.
No, thanks for having me, my man. Any opportunity to talk about the absolute basket case that was Heart of Midlothian during that time, but also the absolute nutcase that was Vladimir Romanov, I jump at that chance.
This is a weird show because Vladimir Romanov's tenure lasts about 9 years. I think it's just over 9 years, actually. But if we spoke about every Vladimir Romanov ism that I think, if we spoke about every single thing he did, I think we would be here till probably next week because there is so much. So what we're going to do the kind of period that's most kind of famous, the infamous kind of 05-06 when George Burley was appointed, and just obviously what happened after that, the situation with the kind of how it went from so promising to so bad in the space of a very short time. But to set the scene of this period, where were Hearts before Romanov took over? Hearts, like most Scottish Premier League clubs around about the kind of 2003 kind of time, were technically insolvent. There was really bad financial difficulties for a lot of clubs in Scottish football, basically due to kind of most of the TV deal that was built on sand. But it was not a good time for Hearts before Romanov took over. There was a lot of problems financially.
Aye, like you said, I think the Satanta deal obviously crippled a lot of Scottish football. Hearts at the time had been, we were on a bit of a wave after '98. We won the Scottish Cup for the first time in 36 years, and with that we got some external investment from the SMG group. It was about £5 million, £6 million or something they invested into the club. And as most clubs do, when you're on a high and you set your sights on the horizon, we sort of set our sights on trying to keep up with Celtic and Rangers. The season, if you remember, the season that Hearts stopped, Celtic stopped Rangers 10 in a row, but also it broke up that 9 in a row squad. So Dick Advocat came in. I remember famously the papers showed Rangers could have 3 starting 11s with, millions and millions and millions of pounds worth of talent. Your Van Bronckhorsts, your De Boer brothers, Tori Andre, Flo, Rod Wallace, all these guys, Marco Negri. And Hearts sillily tried to keep up with it. So we spent the money on transfers. We brought in Gordon Jury, Gary McSwiggan. We spent money on Gordon Petric, which will haunt us forever. Spent money on Kevin James, even from Falkirk at the time, if I remember. And then, like you said, the deal collapses and Celtic and Rangers were spending millions, and the idea that anybody outside of Celtic and Rangers, without the sort of money coming from someone else that could compete, it was just a fantasy, and we really struggled. And at that time, the chairman, Chris Robinson, floated the idea of actually the only way that Hearts can survive is if we sell Tynecastle, the club's home since the day we started, to Cala Homes, I believe it was at the time, and move Hearts to Straighton area. I think it was out where like IKEA and stuff was. And obviously that kicked off a bit of a 10-15 year period where Hearts in various different stages, fans had to fight to save its club, control its club, stop its club from going insolvent and stuff. So it was a bit of a crazy time when Vladimir Romanov came on, and it was getting very, very vicious with Chris Robinson. You know, there's stories of the team bus being stopped and fans pulling him off. There was, I think his house was set on fire, or his garden was set on fire. Folk were at his house, and it was getting pretty crazy. And I think they sold the football club to the first crazy person that said, here, I'll take it."
And that kind of whole period, like as you say, the kind of Save Our Hearts group was kind of formed around about this point. I remember there's some weird kind of stories, as you say, with kind of Chris Robinson. He's obviously passed away recently, so it's kind of hard to speak about this, but he was getting dogs abuse, and any time he was kind of making speeches and things like that, it was a real bad situation for him in particular. But out of nowhere was this Lithuanian businessman, Vladimir Romanov. Now, he was known to Scottish football because he had tried to approach Dundee United, Dundee and Dunfermline to kind of take over them, but they were all rejected. With the benefit of extremely beneficial hindsight, where they clearly must have saw through him.
It's a hard one to know. I think I remember reading, and obviously he was a master of propaganda, but at this point, Vladimir Romanov, but he'd kind of said that they weren't concrete interests. It was more sounding out, what do you think, where can we go? And he kind of, the Dunfermline, Dundee, and that'll tell you that they kicked him to the curb and said no. He'll tell you that he had a look and said no, they're no the clubs for me, etc. So you'll never really know where it was. But in terms of Hearts, he was a total unknown to us. We'd never heard of him, if you know what I mean. He'd never really, it just came sort of out of nowhere, if you know what I mean. It was almost left field. But we were at that point, like you said, we let black balloons off at a game versus Rangers because it could potentially have been one of the last home games that we ever played at Tynecastle. The agreement in principle or whatever had been reached to sell Tynecastle, moved to Murrayfield, and folk, when you back anybody into a corner, folk react. There's no ill will towards Chris Robinson now. Obviously, his Hearts are in a much better place than they were, and our thoughts in that go out to his family and that, because it is sad. No one likes to see anybody lose their life, regardless of what happened in football. Some things in life are bigger than football. But I think Hearts at that point, and them particularly, must have just thought, look, whoever it is, just give them it, like, get me out of here almost.
And it's that thing as well, like the video of this is available, you can see it. When Romanov walked into the AGM, there are Hearts fans shaking his hands. There's Hearts fans, like, the whistles you hear, like the roaring of Hearts fans when he walked in the door that day. It felt, and I think there's this thing as well, when I think there's a wee comparison you can make with Abramovich at Chelsea, because he'd come in, this conquering oligarch who seemed to be this mysterious guy who seemed to have all this money. And to a fan of Hearts who, as you say, they're chasing greatness, they're chasing the split of the old firm, it must have been enticing with this guy coming in saying, as you say, he's a propaganda machine, he would say anything. And he was coming in giving all these kind of fantasies. But it must have been appealing for a Hearts fan at the time, because you've got this guy in who's unknown, who's saying all the right things. That must appeal.
Yeah, it did. But I think what almost set the place on fire in terms of the excitement was what happened on the park. So he took over. I think John Robertson had just took over from. We were in that sort of transition period where Craig Levine had left us. We'd actually just came off back-to-back finishing thirds. We were playing in the Europa League group stages, first Scottish side to do that outside the Old Firm. We were on a bit of a high as a club with everything that was going on off the park. Then he leaves to go to Leicester. I think Robbo took over. Robbo was the manager for a bit, and Romanov was kind of in the background, just sort of finalising the sale of the club and all that sort of stuff. And it was fairly low key in terms of what he was doing when he first took over. It wasn't until that summer when it kind of just started this absolute juggernaut of success and madness and like euphoria that we'd never never seen as Hearts fans, and probably never ever will ever again. I remember we played Middlesbrough in a pre-season friendly, where they registered like Paul Hartley and Stephen Presley and Andy Webster and all these guys as trialists because they hadn't signed new contracts or whatever it was to begin with. Vlad made it free entry to Tynecastle Tuesday night or something like that, 18,000 sell it, you couldn't get in. And I think we drew 1-1, but it was the first glimpse of getting to see Edgaris Jankowskis and Julian Brelli and Rudy Scaccio and Takis Fisis and all that. And folk were like, Jesus, like this could be outrageous. We're playing a brand of football that Hearts have probably never seen, and anybody outside Celtic and Rangers will never probably see again. Very much akin to right now in terms of Celtic at their best right now under Ange Postecoglou. Literally from the first whistle, it was just go for it, 100 mile an hour. Yeah, I remember going into one of the games, missed the kickoff by 10 minutes, and can remember with 5 or 10 minutes to go, being apoplectic with rage off my seat, shouting at Hearts to keep going forward, we need to win, and guys were like, mate, it's 2-0. I missed the 2 goals. We've been 10 minutes late into the ground to let us need to sit down and calm down. So that was like, it was a bit of a low-key start, but as soon as George Burley came in, as soon as Vlad started talking to the press about what he wanted to do, that sort of kick-started the juggernaut for there.
See, before we get into talking about kind of Burley's appointment and things like that, there's an appointment I kind of want to talk about kind of off the field. Obviously, George Folks was very influential in the Romanov kind of thing. He was the one that he kind of sold Romanov to the shareholders. Is that fair to say?
Yep.
But obviously, Romanov comes in and he hires Phil Anderton. Now, Phil Anderton had obviously done a brilliant job at Scottish Rugby. His marketing at Scottish Rugby is probably the reason Scottish Rugby does so well. But his nickname was Firework Phil because he was a showman. He would put on these fireworks displays at Murrayfield. I remember, was it Clive Woodward, I think, said something like it was more like a pop concert than a rugby game at a Six Nations or something. But Phil Anderton was a big appointment at the time. And I remember this specifically because he seemed to be he was going to bring in this new marketing campaign. He was going to transform Hearts off the field because Hearts were going through it was a bad publicity time for Hearts. So Phil Anderton seemed to be the right guy to kind of bring in that new transition.
Yep, 100%. And they were all the sort of folk. I've heard people inside Hearts now decide, like, talk about that literally from the start. It was an operation doomed to fail, like for the very, very start. But from the outside, we went from, I always tell this story about what life was like before Romanoff and what life was like after Romanoff. And it sounds really mental to any club that is like a big club, right? We went to Aberdeen away, last game of the season, and I remember stopping at a petrol station halfway between Edinburgh and Aberdeen, and a beat up Mondeo pulled up beside us after the game, and Stephen Presley and Paul Hartley jumped out. They were giving Lee Wallace a lift so that his mum could give Lee Wallace a lift back up the road. And I was like, that's my football team. Like, they're my heroes. And they're driving about in a car that my dad's got. They're wearing, like, they didn't have club suits on. They've not got club trackies on or whatever. They didn't even have a team bus to take them up to Pataudry, which was where we were at that point. Then Phil Anderton and Romanoff came in, and it was like, no, we want to be a big team. Then to attract big players, we need better facilities. We need a better stadium in terms of what it's like inside. We need to look the part, and we started to go everywhere. We stayed in hotels before games, even if it was at Tynecastle, we stayed in hotels. We drove to the game in a bus. All this stuff that is par for the course for your Celtic, your Rangers, your Man United, etc., etc. But to see Hearts do it, that difference between where we were before, fighting for our lives to stay at Tynecastle, to now suddenly we've got guys that have won the Champions League, we've got guys that have won the Euros, we've got guys that have played in World Cups, we've got these superstars, so to speak, coming in and out of Tynecastle. It was brilliant, and Phil Anderton was massive on that. He was absolutely massive in making that like a big thing. I remember the game against Rangers. We was one of the things. We could have been on the telly for Hibs. We played Hibs in the second game of the season, the first home game of the season. But it was the Rangers one, I think, where it was like you said, we had fireworks, flamethrowers, everything. We had bagpipes and everything you could imagine before the game. It was crazy, and it really did build up to like what you've seen on the pitch. We scored within 14 minutes, 8 games unbeaten, top of the league. Like, it was outrageous.
And obviously, George Burley gets appointed, and we'll kind of do that. We'll kind of talk more about Burley overall, because his tenure, as great as it is, doesn't last very long. But the signings he brings in, I mean, you said there about Scatchel, Jankowskis has obviously been in that Porto team that won the Champions League, but Takis Faisis is always one that stands out to me. Takis Faisis was one of the best players at the European Championships 2 years before, and he's signing for Hearts. I mean, that it showed you just this ambition, and it must have been exciting, because I mean, Faisis was unbelievable, but that statement of signing a player like that, and what was that? What was the kind of memories of those players coming in and just individually just seeing that? Because Hearts had a good team there as well. We'd like, as you say, Presley, Gordon was coming through.
You had Hartley, Robbie Nielsen.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a core of good players, but
yeah,
the only thing I can liken it to is I can remember sitting watching Martin O'Neill's Celtic. I think they were 4-0 up against Hearts in the first half, and you couldn't even be annoyed, because I was watching Henrik Larsson and Chris Sutton and Lubomir Moravchik and just Stilly and Petrov, players you're thinking they just shouldn't play in this league, man. They're miles above where we are. And I remember actually thinking that watching Hearts, like watching Takis Faisis, I was like, what is going on? This guy was sensational in the Euros. Scored the goal that gets them through. I think it was against Turkey or whatever it is, to get
Czech
them
Republic,
out the groups
goal,
to go on and do it. You're watching Gareth Jankowskis, who's played under Jose Mourinho. Won I think he was part of the side that beat Celtic, and then they won the Champions League. You've got Julian Brelli. We've signed him from Juventus. Like, what? How have we managed that? It was crazy. It was surreal. And what was more surreal wasn't it that they were playing for Hearts, but it was actually seeing just how good they were, if you know what I mean. Like, you sign good players, and you have good players that come to your side, and you have your fans' favourites and your cult heroes. But like right now, we watch Craig Gordon, and I'd argue with anybody that even at 39, Craig Gordon is a world-class goalkeeper. He could play for any side in the world and would still be a great goalkeeper. Like, but they're like once in a lifetimes. You get a player like that comes through your club.
Yeah,
we were seeing that every week. Do you know what I mean? Every week it was very surreal.
Burley came in, and obviously the start is tremendous. I think 8 wins and 2 draws for the first 10 games. What did you kind of see that team? Because Burley had obviously come in. Burley was a massive appointment. But what was the kind of memories of that start?
Well, I actually think we went in the full first round of fixtures undefeated.
Yeah.
We didn't lose until we went to Easter Road. But it was crazy. I remember our opening game of the season, we played Kilmarnock, right? We took 4,500 fans or whatever it was to Rugby Park, and I remember pre-game the stand being heaving 10 minutes before kick-off, absolutely chock-a-block, and Phil Anderton and Vladimir Romanov on the pitch taking photos of the crowd, standing in front of them, sort of waving, etc. And then I think we go 1-0 down. I think Stephen Naismith scored to make it 1-0 Kilmarnock, and you're thinking, oh, here we go, typical Hearts. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we've had this team full of superstars, and the dream's going to come unstuck. But then obviously we're going to win 4-2, and it wasn't just that we won 4-2, it was the manner in which we played, the style that we played. Then we play Hibs the next week at Tynecastle. I think we win 4-0, but absolutely blow them away. Like, and then that was it could have been any team in Scotland at that point. We did it to Rangers. We went to Celtic Park and did it. Like, it wasn't just like a one-off type thing. I've watched Hearts, Jim Jeffries' Hearts side in 1998, finished 7 points behind Celtic and Rangers and were superb. Jim Jeffrey's side again in the 2011 season, I think about 11, 12 games unbeaten, and at one point we were 2 or 3 points behind Celtic, challenging up the top, and then the steam run it. This was like a different feeling because we genuinely were like, I don't see how this stops. Like, the players that we're bringing off the bench, Mikael Pospisil, Roman Bednar, these guys were brilliant football players. Like, these were superstars as well that were coming off the bench to play, and they were kicking on like Jamie McAllister and Stephen Simmons and Callum Elliott, like all these players that would have just been run-of-the-mill, bog-standard Scottish football players were now suddenly scoring goals every week and looked phenomenal. So it was more, wasn't it just the results, it was more the style of play was just 4-4-2, get the ball wide and literally run until you stop and you can't run anymore, and then we'll bring somebody else on who will run for you. And it was just, we just steamrolled teams. It was brilliant.
And at that point, clearly thoughts would have been like, this is the chance to really split the old firm. But a move that comes out of the blue, and it did out of the blue at the time, that there was a statement, George Burley had been sacked by Vladimir Romanov. There was talk of a mutual agreement in terms of the two didn't get on. But dig a little deeper, I think we can certainly say there was potentially things happening above George Burley's head. The infamous Ibrahim Tal story is just one of them. But you're having that start, and we'll touch on obviously what happens with Burley. We'll go into it in a bit of detail in a minute. But what was the memories of that day when you found out Burley was sacked?
Well, there'd been rumours building that, you know, things weren't right. Things weren't right behind the scenes. Vladimir Romanov wasn't happy with, you know, we were celebrating a draw at Celtic Park. Vladimir Romanov famously went into the changing room at Celtic Park to tell them to stop celebrating. But nothing to be proud of getting a draw. We're here to win the league or whatever. George Burley, I don't know if he never believed that the team could go on and win the league, or if he was just doing that manager thing and trying to protect his players and keep their feet on the ground. I don't know. We'll never know. But Vlad didn't like that idea that, you know, we didn't believe within the club and the group of players that were there, the Scottish contingent predominantly, didn't believe that they could win the league, and he didn't like that. Then I think we started to hear stories as well about guys on the board, your Phil Andertons and all these guys as well, were of the same opinion that, look, if we can finish second and win a cup, what a season it would be, type thing. And, you know, you can't expect to win the league, etc. And I don't think Vlad liked any of that stuff at the time. He obviously was a total maniac as well. He wanted, like you said, he wanted to sign the players. He had crazy methods of signing players, crazy methods of determining whether people were fit or not, and then he become incredibly paranoid. So it was a total shock, obviously. No one really expects you're riding massively high, top of the league, unbeaten, playing phenomenal stuff. Rangers were imploding under Alec McLeish. You're thinking, what an opportunity we have to go do something special. And then it was like, I think it was the day of the game. We played Dunfermline at Tynecastle, right. and it breaks to say that that George Burley wouldn't be in charge, and Paul Hartley famously has the "For You" gaffer hang on his top as he's walking off the park and all that. So it was surreal. It's probably the best thing to sum it up.
I mean, the thing that's always stuck with me is I remember Andy Webster's been on the show, and I've asked him about it. I says, what actually happened? And I've the story about Ibrahim Tal. Have you heard the story that he arrived at a trial with no boots?
Aye, but that was just par for the course, man. There's about 1,000 stories.
Yeah, but you just think of that, like there's a craziness to that. Like, we play what if in this show. If George Burley had stayed to the end of that season, would Hearts have won the league?
In my opinion, yes.
Yeah, I think they would too.
I think it was almost that Leicester moment, wasn't it? It was Rangers were on the brink things going on in the background that would then transpire in the years to come in terms of their financial situation. They were on a dwindling bit in terms of the quality of players that they had. You know, they went from the world superstars to, you know, Kurt Broadfoot and the likes, etc. And I thought Celtic were a bit of an aging squad as well. And Gordon Strachan, he was a manager at the time, wasn't he? Still Gordon Strachan?
Yeah, it was.
Sure, it was. I just felt that if we'd kept going, there would have been a point where it would have been the point of no return, if you know what I mean. Like, we'd played Celtic away from home and got a draw. We'd played Rangers at home and beat them. You only have to play them again, like, one more round. If we'd went undefeated against them, then yeah, sky's the limit. So I think we could have.
And it obviously facilitates this massive change of feeling around the club. I mean, George Folks, who was a massive Vladimir Romanov guy, had sold his shares to Vladimir Romanov. That allowed Romanov to build his majority in the shares. I mean, it was 82% or something at this point, and Folks immediately just turns course, and he also sacks Anderton as well, who was kind of approaching coaches, and there was just this. It went from such a high point to this unbelievable turn of events in just a short space of time.
Aye, it seems so. It's really different. The Vladimir Romanov story is almost twofold, right? Because take away loads of the noise, loads of the paranoia, and loads of the nonsense that he spoke about. He actually nailed Scottish football hundreds of times. He said that Rangers were running insolvent and there was dodgy stuff going on in the background to keep them afloat. He said that from the start. He said that there's insider stuff where teams know each other's teams because a pal's a coach and tells them, and then suddenly they know what you're doing. There's tapping up, you know, Celtic and Rangers will have their mitts into folk telling people, you know, we're going to sign you, or we can give you this and we can do that. The media disrupting you with news stories and stuff trying to derail us. All that stuff was true. Like, every single bit of that was completely and utterly true. The problem that he had was that it was all intertwined with absolute ramblings of a madman. Do you know what I mean? Like, players showing up to training with football boots, full contract. I used to joke with my mates saying, I'm going to buy a tracksuit and put LC on it and I get my football boots. I'm just going to show up at training. I'm just going to go to Rickerton and see what happens, see how long it takes for them to notice that I'm not a football player, or I shouldn't be there. Because the amount of people that were coming in on trial was just nuts. So I think you've said it soured with the massive high for Hearts of going to Celtic Park, getting a draw, 1-0 down as well, come back and get a draw. We're very unlucky not to win it. Mikael Pospisil hits the bar. I think Artur Boric at the time would have been in goals for Celtic. I think he makes a brilliant save right at the very end as well from Pospisil again. And from that kind of moment, things I've heard Robbie Nielsen talk about it in other podcasts. I've heard the Mark Donaldson that runs the Scarce Around the Funnel podcast. He was the media in chief for Hearts at the time and was talking about, you know, some of the crazy in the background. So it was a shock. It was crazy, but I don't know. I find some of the stuff that he was talking about was actually not that far off being right.
And then obviously he comes out and says that he's going to bring in a top-class manager to replace Burley. There's names mentioned, Claudio Ranieri, Otmar Hitzfeld. I don't know if any of them were legit, but to bring up those names and then who he actually brings in is, I mean, this was never going to go down well with the fans. Now, I'm not going to judge Graham Rix for anything. I'm going to judge him here on his football tenure. He should never have been in that. He should never have been appointed Hearts. That was never going to go well.
No, and you're right. The whole thing was a shambles. The names that were bounded about that we could get, and what we were looking for. Claudio Ranieri obviously it's famous for being in Edinburgh, having chats. Neville Scala was one that never really went away. Vlad was kind of obsessed with trying to get Neville Scala in, and then obviously total left field Graham Ricks comes in. Now I'm the opposite from you. I know you're saying you can't judge him and all that sort of stuff, and I suppose it's not here for us to do it, but that should have instantly ruled him out of any job, any big job in Scottish football. And it's something that plagues the club. It's something that the club's embarrassed about now, especially when you look at how we've rebranded as a club now. We've got Save the Children, we've got LED on the stuff, all those things, and that black cloud will always be there, that should never have been at the club. And I felt Hearts fans were in between a rock and a hard place. We're on the verge and still have the opportunity to have an amazing season. We go into the Boxing Day game versus Celtic. We win that game. We go above them in points. So we're in the Scottish Cup. We still had loads to play for. We're still chasing a league title. So the fans, rightly or wrongly, you've got to just get behind the manager, because you're chasing this dream. You're clinging on to a dream that we could do something special, if you know what I mean. And you're right, even just if you take his football and pedigree for where he'd been and what he'd done, the job was always going to be too big for him anyway.
I totally forgot about Neville Scala, but now you mention it, I remember it very clearly, that it was just, he seemed to want them all the time. And
every single time, mate, single time there was a managerial spot came up, he wanted. It's another thing that was really weird about Vladimir Romanov and some of the stuff that he got right. He was trying to build what basically Man City and Man United and Arsenal and all these teams have right now. He wanted Neville Scala to be the head of the football department. So he wanted him to be like a football director almost. He wanted the academies to play a certain way. He wanted like the scouting networks to be a certain way, bring certain players in, certain managers, etc., but never funded it or never really knew anything about football business as to how to bring that in, which is why he always just relied on his son, like the one person that he could trust almost, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing about this, is that there's a weird nepotism about this as well. George Folks and Phil Anderton were probably good at their job, but it just replaces him with his son. And it's not because he's the best man for the job, it's because he's the guy you can trust. And George Folks is a weird one, because George Folks obviously brings him to the table, I would imagine. He's gives him a way in. And as soon as he sees it turning, he's Vladimir Romanov's biggest critic. And I've always found that weird thing about it, how quickly that can change.
But that George Folks is a politician, isn't he?
Yeah.
And that's, they'll go in the direction of the populace. It's to save their skin, if you know what I mean. It's dead easy to say, oh, I brought him in because he had all these false promises and he's not delivered, so now I want him out. And it's like, I know, but you also could have had some of the warnings that were sent your way about potentially, where's this money coming from? What's his true intention with a football club? Done a bit of due diligence, etc., before you bring him to the table. I always found him a bit of a blowhard, if I'll be honest with you, George Folks. He's still a blowhard right now on Hearts Twitter. He'll pipe up every now and again when there's something to have a pop at with a football club, if you know what I mean, and stoom when everything's rosy and everything's gone well, and got no time for folk like that.
But obviously Ricks, I think he was in a hiding to nothing. The whole situation with Webster as well. Ricks is sacked in March and replaced with Valdis Ivanauskas. What did you think when he came in?
Nothing, because we never really knew anything about him. Like, we never knew who he was.
Were you surprised though, because he was bringing the guy in from Kaunas? Like, he was bringing his own guy in. Did you see that coming when Ricks was sacked?
No, to be honest with you, we were at that point where everybody that we signed was signed to Kaunas and then came to us on loan. Whatever was happening in Kaunas and the link with Kaunas, was just par for the course now for Hearts. It was just what Hearts did. If you know what I mean. I actually feel really sorry for Valdas Ivanauskas because he was actually brilliant. He was actually a really good coach, really good manager, and just the stress of having to work with the madness that was Vlad and others. And I've heard Zaliaukis or people talk about Marius Zaliaukis say that because the Lithuanians could speak to Vlad, they almost bore the brunt of everything that happened, and then they become that, especially later on that we'll probably talk about. But when players are being paid, they're going to go to the people at the club that can actually converse with Romanov and say what the fuck's happening. Do you know what I mean? And and that's where, so it made sense to have Valdas at the time. I think Hearts fans just wanted ready shot at Rex as quickly as we could. He was just weird. The way he spoke in the media was weird. He smoked those silly wee roll-up things, and he kept licking his lips all the time. And he was just weird. He was just a weird guy.
But obviously, the second place finish in the league, the chance of Champions League football, but also a Scottish Cup win over Gretna and penalties. This is a weird game when you actually look back at this and just how both clubs end up going. What are your memories of that day?
Well, we've had two of these before, really weird. 2006, obviously, we play Hibs in the semi-final. It's the first time the clubs have met each other in the semi-final for a century or something like that. And obviously we batter them. Paul Hartley scores a hat-trick, and whoever gets through that final plays Gretna in the final. So we almost won it that day. Do you know what I mean? Like we knew we'd won the cup, or we should win the cup. So it was that typical Scottish football way of, we kind of showed up, like 45,000 tickets sold. We had pretty much the whole of Hampden. We were all decided that it was going to be Stephen Presley's first ever trophy as a captain. So everybody was dressed up as Elvis and all that sort of stuff in honour of him. And we just almost made a total idiot ourselves and lost it. It was a very, very strange game.
But obviously, it kind of works out as a victory. And Evan, as you say, Ivanauskas is very underrated because he's dealing with this complete shambles in the background, but he's signed off due to health reasons. What do you think? Do you think that was legit, or was there something else to that?
Genuinely, so the summary that we win the cup, massive high, but every player, and this is where I think Hearts fans started to be like, oh, actually, things behind the scenes could potentially be a bit mental. Like we were in defence mode as Hearts. We just felt like everybody on the planet didn't want Hearts to do well. So there was all these constant leaks and stories and things going on that like sort of making it ridiculing what Hearts were up to. So Hearts fans were kind of in this sort of self-defence mode of, we'll not listen to anything that's in the media and we'll just believe whatever the club say because we're winning trophies. We've split the old firm, the first team to do that outside in the new league structure, etc. Champions League qualification. But then in that summer, players start to leave. Rudy Scatchell decides he doesn't want to stay at the club, and you're thinking, right, we've potentially got Champions League football here, and he'd rather go play for Southampton in the Championship at the time. Then we obviously bring in a shed load of random players in the summer, and you knew that the writing was on the wall with just how mental Hearts were in the background when I think Julian Brelly got sent off against AK Athens for wearing an earring, and it's like, how are we on this stage and having players sent off for having an earring in? So I just think it built up. It was just too much for him at the time, and obviously, but it lasted about 6 months of the next again season, and then I think he just had enough and said, "No, like, get me out of here. I can't do this."
And he brings in, let's just get his name right, Edward Malovayev. I think she's right there.
Edward Malafy. He was a psychopath.
Yes, and
an absolute psychopath.
And obviously, Romanov at this time, he comes out with this statement that all the players were up for sale to whatever club would take them.
Yep. And again,
he's mental.
he is, but like underlying, right? He has a point in some of the stuff that he was saying, because Kurt Broadfoot, for example, he was just on Open Goal a few weeks ago, a month or so ago, talking about and laughing with the others on that podcast about how they deliberately undermined Alessi at Kilmarnock.
Yeah.
Because of his crazy foreign training techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, you're a professional football player, man.
Yes, I
like
totally agree.
look at Celtic's reaction to Ronnie Dyler as well. You know, Scott Brown pictured steaming outside a kebab shop night before the League Cup final, no wanting to be vegan. Chris Commons arguing with him because he's been taken off. Like, we have a thing in Scottish football culture where we just don't like foreigners. Like, we just we don't, I don't know what it is, we just don't react to them.
It's all wrong. Yeah, I totally agree.
And part of that was right. And the other thing that Romanoff used to talk about as well is that, you know, I've heard people that have played for like John Hughes and all these type of guys gone to Ibrox, and you know, the team talk is just enjoy it, boys, brilliant. You know, imagine one day you get to play for them. You know, what a place to play your football. And you think, you're here to win. Like, what do you mean? There was a story, I remember a John Hughes story, where he was almost boasting at a time where he was a manager of Inverness, and Anthony Stokes had been falling in and out of favour with whoever they Celtic was. It would be Gordon Strachan or Ronnie Dyler, I can't remember who it was in charge of Celtic at the time. And he'd been disciplined and chucked out the squad, but he was in the stand, and John Hughes pre-match was saying how he was up talking to Anthony Stokes, telling him that he was still a good player and get your head in the game, and you know what a club you're at and you could do well here and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, in 2 hours you're playing against this team. Why are you even bothered? You should be celebrating that Tony Stokes is in the stand. It should be part of your team talk. But again, it's just, there is something deep rooted within Scottish, and I don't know if it's because they're the two giants that are here, right? There's no point getting away from it. Every second person you speak to supports either Celtic or Rangers, right? Every football coach wants to coach Celtic and Rangers. Everybody knows that if you make it in Scotland, it's because you're at Celtic and Rangers. So I think Vlad came in at the time when everything was rosy and wanted to smash that. He wanted to be like, no, we want to change this. We want to be the big team. We want to go for it. And he found resistance from nearly everybody that he spoke to. You know, if he told people that in the media, he was ridiculed. They would laugh at him, say, you can't do it, you know, go on and do it. They called him mad Vlad, etc., etc. When he talked to the Scottish players, the Scottish boys in the team, they were like, oh, I'm not sure, you know, we could, but maybe next year that we could do it. And then his manager's saying the same thing. So, like, he was crazy, but underlying, he did point out a hell of a lot of stuff that is wrong with the game here, if you know what I mean. And that was one of the things that always stuck out for me was this resistance to anything that wasn't the old boys, Scottish Boys Club Act.
And obviously that time, kind of the situation, the players are showing there's unrest and things like that, and it leads to the infamous press conference with Stephen Presley, Craig Gordon and Paul Hartley. And Stephen Presley kind of reads out this statement, and there's a weird thing about it, because I don't know if Stephen Presley was going, the understanding is Stephen Presley was going to get the assistant manager's job or something like that. There was something weird about this. But that press conference, what did that kind of tell you at the time, that these three the three top players of that team were basically saying how bad it was behind the scenes, and there's unrest in the dressing room and morale's not good? What does that tell you as a fan?
Everything that we already knew, if you know what I mean. Like, it was all, if it was the stuff you didn't want to hear. Like, it was the stuff that you hoped was exaggerated in the press. But if it had been anybody else, I think they maybe got a different reaction. But the fact that the club captain, Stephen Presley, at that point was an absolute hero to Hearts fans. He was a living legend. Craig Gordon, young superstar goalkeeper that we were like, this guy's going to go to the top. Like, he's a world-class keeper even at 2021 when he was coming through, and Paul Hartley, this cult hero icon that scores hat-tricks against Hibs and wins cups and stuff, if they're coming out and telling you this is crazy, then geez, it must be crazy. And at that point was at the height of we were signing random player after player, bringing in loads and loads of folk for Lithuania. Randoms, we just spent 830,000 grand or whatever it was on Merslad Bezlesia, who was a total flop. So it was a shock, but not it wasn't like a massive. It didn't knock me for six. We were kind of, what they said was what we always kind of feared was the case behind the scenes anyway.
Did you know then that it was just a matter of time before those three were out the door?
Aye. And what I just said there about Scottish players and the mentality, that's different for them three. I totally understand why they did what they did. Yeah. I think, especially, like I said, if it was anybody else, it was the fact that the three of them who have a deep love for the club, they wouldn't say that. They were talking to the fans. They were talking to the press, but they were talking to the fans. Do you know what I mean? They were trying to say, look, we've tried our best. We're doing everything we can, but this isn't normal. This isn't normal in the background. At that point was the height of Vlad flu. So, the facts would come through, Rix or even Auskis or whoever would day the team lineup, and then 2 minutes later it would change, and then they were going to see the crazy witch doctor with a silly stick that they would touch. They'd touch and they'd plug themselves into a machine that told them whether they were fit or no and all this, and they were just like, nah, this is crazy. Get me out of here.
And get into the kind of 2007, 2008, on the field it's not going well, there's really poor results, and Romanov says he's going to appoint a British style manager in the near future. He promotes Stevie Frail, who was obviously as an assistant along with, how do you pronounce it? Kurjochba or something like that? Was he the Korabochka? He was the problem with Stevie Frail is, and Stevie Frail obviously was a decent player for Hearts, but what does that tell you when Stevie Frail's basically getting the job? And it was just weird.
He was a youth coach, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And in the nicest will, in the way folk that have been in the game and played the game, there's a difference, right? There's a difference between a coach and a youth coach, etc. A great example of that is the Rangers Hibs semi-final in the League Cup last year. They've went from Steven Gerrard stopping 10 in a row, playing a brilliant style of football, undefeated in the league, etc., to that team have had to go a week or 10 days and being prepared by the under-18s coaches.
Yeah.
And what they get beat 3-0 at Hampden. Do you know what I mean? The players are watching the subs that are coming on and thinking, what the hell? What we doing? What we doing that for? It? And it shouldn't be. Like you said, there should be professionalism there or then, but football, when folk are in football, know the difference between a coach and a youth coach. So Stevie Frail was always on a hide into nothing in that aspect.
And obviously as well, they make approaches for the likes of Vladimir Weiss was benching, Jurgen Rober was just a couple of names, but Neville Scala gets brought up again here. But do you think Romanov had made the job unattractive because he was interfering with the team lines? I
think that you start to see that with the appointments of people.
Yeah.
They were jobs for the boys almost. It was anybody that couldn't have peeked behind the curtain. Do you know what I mean? These folk already knew how it worked, knew what to expect, knew what was coming, and it was basically just a case of I'm crazy, deal with it, rather than no, everything's brilliant, come in, see what you can do, and then have to sack them after 2 weeks because they didn't want to play random Lithuanians for Kaunas and they didn't want to change the shape and all that sort of stuff.
Jabba Laszlo comes in as well. He comes in, and to be fair to him, I think with the hand he's dealt, he does pretty well. He probably comes out of this with a decent reputation. Is that fair?
Aye, but he was equally as mental as Romanov.
Weirdly mental, because I think he would probably bore you to tears if you had a 5-minute conversation with him. But he obviously had to work with the same constraints they all did, but he seemed to come out of it probably better than most.
Aye, and look, I think it was a testament to the players that were playing for Hearts at the time, where they didn't just chuck it. Do you know what I mean? They didn't just think, who cares, man? Like, this is crazy. Get me out of there. You know, I think a mixture of the fact that your Hearts are a big team, you're finishing third is kind of the expectation, or at least playing in Europe and stuff. So Xabi Laszlo brought a bit of normality back to Hearts when it came to that sense. If you know what I mean, the football wasn't dreadful, and we got some fairly decent results.
When does the kind of financial situation at the club begin to kind of rear its head? Because you look at the 9 million for Gordon, for example, spending money on players like Kingston and Abua. Now, I thought Kingston was really good, but he seemed to be he would turn it on and off whenever he wanted, which, as you know as well as I do, if you're in Scottish football, that doesn't work. But there seemed to be a lot of money going out the club, despite there being some decent income as well. So was that when did that first become a situation that you were like, wait a minute, this is potentially not good?
For the start, to be honest, we were paying. We had a Chilean striker called Pinilla, right?
Yeah.
The best football player I've ever seen play for Hearts. 2 goals in 3 games he played for Hearts. Superb. Yeah. What a football player. Went back to Serie A.
World Cup.
He did, he went back to he went to Serie A, scored goals for fun, went to the World Cup with Chile, and retired playing football in Chile. An absolute legend. He's now like the Gary Lineker, the match of the day in Chile.
Yeah.
And we're paying him £30,000 a week. Outrageous. £2,000 a week for Hearts, £28,000 a week or whatever for Kaunas in Lithuania. We were Jose Goncalves, Ibrahim Tal, Miroslav Bezlija. All these players were on like £10,000-20,000 a week playing with Hearts, and you're thinking, what the hell? Like, where is that money coming from? Like, so it was kind of always in the background. But again, it's like any football club. You play well, you win, nobody cares. Literally no one cares. You know, I've said loads of times before that you want to know what football clubs in Scotland are doing well, go on Twitter and search who the football director is for that club at the time, or the head of the academy, and you'll start to see people tweeting about them. That's when you know things are gone wrong, because the only folk that fans should know about is the manager, maybe the assistant manager, and the players. That's it. That's when everything's rosy. When they start calling out CEOs and head scouts and the catering staff and all that, that's when you know things are going wrong.
Obviously, as well, you mentioned earlier about the players' wages been paid late, and win bonuses remaining outstanding and things like that. Like, how hard is it if you're a player when you're not getting paid? Obviously, we would know like our own job if we weren't getting paid, but that can't be good. Like, when how are you meant to focus on playing football when you're not getting paid? And you remember at the time, there seemed to be a desperation. I think Christoph Berra, I think they were getting to the stage where they were telling him not to come in. They didn't want him there.
Aye, there was loads of stories of things like that. You know, you've got guys like Ian Black gone back to painting and decorating to make some money. And you know, I've listened to loads of the players. From my own podcast, I've been lucky enough to talk to some of the players that were there at the time, and it's the football club, not the fans. It's the football club. It's the folk in the background, your masseuse, your chefs, the folk in the club that look after you every single day. They're the reason why those players kept coming in. Do you know what I mean? Because they were like, actual, we're on this together. Like, folk were paying wages of staff, they were missing their bonus, they were paying young boys wages, like older pros being like, right, what do you need to get by for your mortgage, etc. And you knew that we were in trouble when Vlad stopped coming, right? Vlad loved being pictured on the telly and being at the game and having folk singing his name and all that sort of stuff. He loved all that stuff. When he stopped showing up for, you know, the games on the telly versus Celtic and Rangers, when he stopped coming to Hampden, when he stopped coming to any games whatsoever, and we just kept getting wheeled out as we weasel son, you knew that things weren't gone right.
And when does it get to that point where you think when administration becomes a possibility? Because Jim Jeffries, for example, comes back, and I think it just doesn't work, because although Romanov isn't there, he's not there in person, but he's obviously still got his guys there who are just, basically Jeffries said something wrong, I think, and it resulted in Jeffries being fired.
Aye, and there's some do's and don'ts at a football club, and Jim Jeffries is an absolute hero.
Mm-hmm.
Won the Scottish Cup with Hearts, captained Hearts. Whatever he wants, he gets at Tynecastle, and you bring him back and then sack him when we're actually doing really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that team. It's got Kevin Kyle, Rudy Scatchell, Ryan Stevenson, David Templeton, all these players, and we're doing really, really well as a team.
Mm-hmm.
That's when there's certain things that become our final straws, if you know what I mean. But that was when it started to become bleak, because you're thinking, what day we do here? Because who's going to come in now and save Hearts? We're however many millions in debt, and don't get me wrong, we're only in debt to the guy that owns us, his bank. So, but how do we get rid of him? Do you know what I mean? But no one's going to come over and pay £50 million to buy Hearts. It's not going to happen. So it started to become a bit scary. You know what I mean? It started to be like, Jesus, where do we go now?
Winning the Scottish Cup as well, obviously, that must have been a massive good feeling and mixed with a bad feeling. Obviously beating Hibs as well in a 5-1 victory must have been a very big day just for the whole club. That's just a really good day in terms of beating your rivals, but this bleak situation that's going on behind the scenes, for this on-field situation, that must have been great.
Well, again, I'll do what we did with Gretna. I'll go back to, and this, for Hibs fans listening, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to enrage you, but beating Celtic in the semi-final with a last-minute penalty at Hampden, come on, when does that happen? When do you get a last-minute penalty v Celtic in the Scottish Cup semi-final to knock them out? We knew that Hibs were in the final, so, and Hearts have never been beat by Hibs at Hampden, right? So, and we've got a ridiculously good record v Hibs. They were in the mud with Pat Fenlon. They were bottom six. We were unbeaten that whole season against them. When we beat Celtic, I knew we'd won the cup. I know that sounds, in hindsight, aye, cool, but obviously I'm still nervous, thinking, oh no, what if we can't lose this final, the first ever Scottish Cup final in 100 years or whatever it was, the biggest cup final there will ever be. So the Celtic game was like a massive, massive high. Mm-hmm. Then obviously you beat Hibs, and you don't just beat them, 5-1, we equal the joint highest ever Scottish Cup final victory. It could have been more. I think very famously, Hearts had kind of said that, Paolo Sergio had said to Gary Locke just to tell them to sort of see the game out after we make it 4-1. We kind of said, for the next 10 minutes after it goes 4-1, we'll go for it and see if we can score anymore, and if we don't, then we'll just see out the game, and obviously it finishes 5. So it was a ridiculously big day. It was a massive result for the football club. It was, like you said, the players that had been through quite a lot of rubbish got to celebrate with a trophy. You win it against your rivals. You've got Gary Locke, assistant manager, absolute club legend, Hearts through and through. But you feel sorry for the guys that weren't there. David Templeton was injured, missed the final. Kev Kyle, for example, had played a massive part in that side and then left. So there was loads of players that missed out, but you can't ask for a better ending to what was a horrible time, if you know what I mean, to beat Hibs at Hampden.
And just to kind of wrap up, the administration obviously becomes apparent in 2013, and then obviously the this amazing story of what happens when fans get together and try and bring the club back to good health. And you've got Anne Budge, who obviously I would imagine in your own, she'll probably be always, and she'll always have praise. Our praises will always be sung for coming in to rescue the club at that point.
100%. And I think in hindsight, looking back at it, Hearts were very, very lucky that our administration and financial downfall coincided with Rangers, because Rangers didn't have a white knight. You know, you're thinking the size of that football club, the potential of that football club, nobody's coming to buy them. Like, what? So if no one cares enough to buy Rangers, who is coming to save Hearts? Like, do you know what I mean? If they're not going to come and get a 52,000 seater 5-star stadium or whatever it is, the 100 and whatever many trophies and all this, and European football and the fan base worldwide, etc. If no white knight is riding over the hill to save them, then we are done. Like, and I think that helped galvanise Hearts to be like, we need to do something, because we've just seen the biggest club in Scotland go out of business. We can't do that. Like, we have to do something. So there's some people in the background, Brian McCormack, for example, massive debt to him. Gary Mackay, club hero, is lambasted by the Hearts fans because he's outspoken, but he's one of us. He just says his mind. He was a vehement opponent of Vladimir Romanov, saying, where are we going here? What's happening here? Because if we didn't get this guy in check, we're snookered. And he was right. He played a big part in getting Anne involved. And then obviously, like, Budge has done so many amazing things for Hearts. I was very, very lucky to be at the official handover last year between the club and the Foundation of Hearts, when the club handed the ownership over to the Foundation of Hearts. And when I got to sit down and speak to Anne Budge for my podcast, I read a quote from the AGM where Chris Robinson sold Tynecastle, where he basically said that if we don't sell Tynecastle, the club will die. Like, to stay here is to sign the club's death warrant. And I was sat with Anne Budge inside a £20 million new stand, fan-owned, debt-free, with, you know, Save Our Children on the top, just signed a thing with motor neuron disease. We, you know, the biggest fan-owned club in Britain, handing over £13 million at the time it was in pledges, 9,000 pledgers. It was proper surreal. And that the biggest thing that Anne Budge has done is, and it's something that no other, and it's probably she probably wouldn't have done it if she was a football person. It's a stick that people beat her with all the time, is especially when we were on that Craig Levein era type thing, was, oh, you know, she doesn't know football. Well, luckily she didn't know football, because she came in from day one, said, I'm here, I'll put the money up, but I'm giving the fans the club. And that's what she said, you know, and she did it. Most folk that are football orientated would have came in, seen the potential, took some money here and there and said, you know what, actually I might just ride it out and make some money for a while. She invested the £8 million, whatever it was, and took whatever she was owed back, and then said, here's the club. Like, I did exactly what I said I was going to do. The club's in safe hands, and now look at us.
The final point, obviously, is the kind of subject was Vladimir Romanov, and you see now, obviously, you read news stories on him. He's in a bit of trouble himself. And what do you kind of make of that? Because obviously, when Romanov came in, and it's hindsight's a wonderful thing, and when we do these podcasts, you're looking back, but you're also looking back in your thoughts at the time. But what do you think now when you think back about Vladimir Romanov? Do you wish it had worked, or do you think, like, what happened was always going to happen?
It's one of those things, like you said, the old chicken and egg stuff, isn't it? It's like we wouldn't be here right now, fan owned, debt free, new stand, looking to the future with like unbelievable foundations to build on. If we didn't have Vlad, like, do you know what I mean? So, and we've been there, we've been down the rabbit hole, so to speak. We've been on the cusp of oblivion and know what it takes to save the club. And, you know, I look at Newcastle, for example,
Yeah.
as a perfect example of that. They're riding the wave right now with this new owners that have got a total dodgy background and all that sort of stuff. And you think, right, where's that going to go? I look at Chelsea now, pre-Abramovich, like the guy wants to play North and South All-Star games. He seems a bit of a absolute mental case.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, you know, we've seen down the rabbit hole and we know what it's like to be minutes away from losing your football club. I've also been to the massive highs of actual. Imagine a football club in Scotland does win the league that isn't Celtic Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we glorify Celtic and Rangers triumphs in Scotland as if we should almost be proud of them, or it's something that we should be dead happy to be about. You know, we glorify 10 in a row, and you think, actually, what a damning indictment that is for your game where we are. Yeah, Celtic and Rangers deserve it because they're brilliantly run clubs and massive clubs, etc. But the truth is, in 3 years' time, it's going to be 40 years since anybody outside the Celtic or Rangers won the league.
Yeah.
Like, that's mad. And especially this week, we've just signed a TV deal that does no favours for anybody. We've got infighting all the time, this 11-1 vote where no one can change. We'll never change Scottish football. Never, ever, ever. Because
I totally agree.
Celtic and Rangers will look after themselves and everybody else will feed off the scraps at that table. Like, look at Dave Cormack at Aberdeen. Like, he couldn't be any further away from what the actual Aberdeen fans think. Their owners in the press backing up Doncaster, backing up the deal, and the fans are going, wait a minute, that's a terrible deal. We didn't want that. And so we've kind of been there with Vlad. We've been to the massive highs where, you know, we almost done the unthinkable, and it just, you know, it was just one too crazy step too much, and too much paranoia, and we batter Vladimir Romanov with that. But actually, when you scratch beneath the surface, Scottish football is a basket case anyway. Like, do you know what I mean? It was it's the craziest league in the world. There's things that happen in this league that will never happen anywhere else, and Vlad was probably just too idealistic and too eager to change the world straight away, and then lost sight of what was happening on the pitch and just started picking fights left, right and centre, and ultimately just got bored.
Liam, I've thoroughly enjoyed that. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for going back in this time with me. I hope it wasn't too painful.
No, it was, like I said, 2 cups, 2 Scottish Cups, split the Old Firm, Champions League football. Yeah, it wasn't that bad.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you very much, everyone who's tuned in. Please join us on the next episode as we will look back on Aberdeen's 1983 miraculous Cup Winners' Cup winning campaign. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you soon. Cheers.